Last time we spoke about the breakthrough in Okinawa. Despite relentless attacks on critical positions like Sugarloaf Hill and Wana Ridge, American Marines encountered heavy casualties, yet they persisted, inching forward against tenacious resistance. As mid-May approached, the situation for the Japanese commanders deteriorated. Encircled and suffering significant losses, they began plotting a retreat to more defensible positions. On the ground, Marines battled through mud and enemy fire, showcasing incredible resolve amidst dire circumstances. Communications were crumbling, supplies dwindled, and morale waned, yet the determination of both sides was undeniable. By late May, the tides shifted further in favor of the Allies, marking pivotal breakthroughs despite the challenges. Amidst the ruin and chaos, the relentless struggle for control over Okinawa symbolized the brutal nature of the war, and the unwavering spirit of those fighting on both sides, setting the stage for an eventual Allied victory. This episode is The Fall of Shuri. Welcome back to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and you can also produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Eastern Front Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Over on both of these, I just released an episode covering Japan's government by assassination period. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, about 25 episodes and ongoing at this point, early access to all of the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Now, as we last left off, the battle for Okinawa was reaching a critical juncture. General Buckner's 10th Army had made significant gains, successfully breaking through the fortified Japanese defenses on both of the flanks. The 6th Marine Division under General Shepard had effectively established control over the Naha area, while General Arnold's 7th Division achieved impressive penetration at Yonabaru. However, despite these advancements, the remainder of the American forces faced formidable obstacles. They were grappling with relentless rain, fierce enemy resistance, and severe supply shortages, which left them effectively stalled in front of Shuri. In response to the encroaching American forces, General Usajima had dispatched General Fujioka's 62nd Division to launch a counteroffensive aimed at driving the invaders out of Yonabaru. Meanwhile, Usajima was preparing his 32nd Army for a strategic withdrawal south to the Kiamo Peninsula. Fortunately for the Americans, they had caught wind of the defenders' intentions. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, on May the 27th, General Buckner ordered his troops to apply strong and unrelenting pressure on the enemy. The goal was clear: keep the Japanese forces off balance and prevent an easy transition to the new defensive positions. Although the continuing downpour hindered the possibility of a large-scale coordinated army-wide attack, it did not deter Buckner's strategy. Instead, he initiated a series of strong combat patrols along the front lines, which immediately encountered stiff resistance from Japanese troops who had not yet begun their withdrawal. Over on the west coast, as patrols from Colonel Roberts' 22nd Marines scouted the area, they discovered that the Japanese had largely abandoned Naha. This news spurred the 2nd Battalion into action. They crossed the Asato River, moved through the lines established by Shepard's reconnaissance company, and pressed deeper into the western part of Naha. Simultaneously, Colonel Shapley's 4th Marines made their last desperate push to extend American control into eastern Naha, fighting valiantly against the entrenched enemy. Farther east, Colonel Finn's 32nd Regiment once again faced fierce resistance from the hastily committed 62nd Division, which staunchly defended their position. However, not was all lost. Patrols from Colonel Green's 184th Regiment managed to reach Inasomi, meeting only scattered resistance. This breakthrough provided a crucial indication that the enemy had no intention of withdrawing into the Chinen Peninsula. Yet as the clock struck midnight, a significant yet largely unnoticed transition occurred in the waters off Okinawa. Admiral Halsey's 3rd Fleet relieved Admiral Spruance's 5th Fleet. For the troops ashore, this change in command went by without a hint of recognition. The same ships and task groups continued their crucial support for ground operations, now operating under new numerical designations and leadership. However, Halsey faced an immediate challenge as Admiral Ugaki launched an extensive Kikusai attack, a large-scale kamikaze assault involving 110 enemy aircraft. The day of May the 27th proved costly, with 3 destroyers, 1 destroyer minesweeper, 2 transports, 1 sub-chaser, and 2 auxiliary ships all suffering heavy damage. The following morning brought clear skies, which only heightened the danger for American naval vessels. Several kamikaze aircraft succeeded in sinking the destroyer USS Drexler, while also inflicting damage on a transport ship, 3 freighters, and a landing craft throughout the day. Meanwhile, back on land, Colonel Whaling's rehabilitated 29th Marines took over from the battered 4th Marines along the west coast. The 1st Battalion executed a concerted attack alongside the 22nd Marines, advancing successfully by 250 yards through the rubble-strewn city of Naha. In an impressive display of momentum, Robert's men pushed forward unopposed towards the Kokuba estuary, eventually encountering resistance near Onoyama Island. Over to the east, the improvement in weather allowed Colonel Mason's 1st Marines to launch a coordinated offensive. The 2nd Battalion fought valiantly, climbing the peak of a 110-meter hill. The forward elements of Company E gained the hill crest, but were forced to withdraw by vicious enemy fire, which raked their position. Lieutenant Colonel Maggie felt that his depleted battalion, down to a total strength of 277 men in the rifle companies, might recapture the hill, but, quote, it could not possibly hold it against a strong enemy counterattack. Although new replacements were available to regiments for training and other use, a divisional order prevented them from being sent to frontline units during battle situations that called for the utmost in skill and knowledge of veterans. Throughout most of the morning and of that of the afternoon, the 2nd Battalion of the 1st Marines concentrated their fire and supporting weapons on the reverse slopes of a 110-meter hill and engaged the Japanese in fierce and continuous firefights. Nightfall brought no end of the enemy resistance, and many infiltrators were killed in the battalion's lines. In contrast, the 3rd Battalion experienced relatively little opposition, allowing some patrols to penetrate into the Wana Draw. At the same time, Colonel Griebel's 3rd Battalion effectively moved from its front lines to the Asato River, while his 1st Battalion achieved a significant milestone by capturing Beehive Hill. However, despite the break in the rain, the conditions on the ground rendered large-scale movements impractical, stalling further advances across the battlefield. Despite Arnold's determined efforts to push west through Fujioka's blocking positions, progress was quite minimal. Nevertheless, he was able to consolidate his grip on the Osato Hill mass as Green's 2nd Battalion advanced to a position within about 1,000 yards of Shinozato, strategically located at the neck of the Kiamo Peninsula. The lack of success from the 62nd Division in driving back the breaching American forces reinforced General Ushijima's resolve to evacuate Shuri, while the opportunity still existed. In light of this, he ordered the withdrawal to commence the following evening. On May the 29th, while the 7th Reconnaissance Troop managed to scout a significant portion of the Kiamo Peninsula without any incident, the 7th and 96th Divisions faced fierce resistance as they attacked towards the road network south of Shuri. The enemy's resolute defense resulted in only minimal gains for the American assault units, and General Bruce's 77th Division, after what can only be described as, quote, a day almost entirely spent in hand-to-hand combat, would find themselves unable to penetrate the intense cordon of defensive fire that protected the Japanese positions. In stark contrast to the west, Griebel's 1st Battalion made a rapid advance, quickly gaining the crest of Shuri Ridge. Then they launched a bold assault upon Shuri Castle. For those of you who are, in your mid-30s and you played Call of Duty World at War, well, in the Japanese campaign, this is kind of the end of it. Sorry for bringing up this random fact. I recently made an episode with a bunch of my friends covering Call of Duty World at War, specifically highlighting the fact there's an unbelievable emphasis on war crimes in that game. And I mean more than any other game, I think. That episode will be coming out in a few weeks, and if any of you have a chance, please check it out. It's going to be rather hilarious. On May the 25th, as part of the final stages of the Okinawa campaign, the American battleship USS Mississippi bombarded Shuri Castle for over 3 days, and by May the 27th, it was engulfed in flames. That night, the Japanese forces retreated, abandoning Shuri, while U.S. troops pursued them southward. The 1st Battalion of the 5th Marines had started its attack on the 29th of May, with Companies B and C in assault, and Company A following in trace of Company C. The Marines quickly gained the crest of Shuri Ridge, and Lieutenant Colonel Shelburne requested permission for one of his companies to storm Shuri Castle, which commanded the position. Although the castle was in the zone of action of the 77th Infantry Division, General Duval gave his assent in request of the view of the great danger of enemy action from the strong point. The 1st Marine Division commander felt that, quote, "At that time, the position of the 77th Division was such that it would have taken several hard days fighting through enemy resistance before the castle could be taken. Company A drove east along a muddy ridge line, overwhelming the few Japanese in its path, and by about 10:15, the castle, the core of the Shuri defenses, had been secured. The Marine unit entered Shuri through a gap in the covering forces caused by the withdrawal of the 3rd Battalion, 15th Independent Mixed Regiment of the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade, in the course of the Japanese retreat from Shuri. This seems to have been the only notable instance of confusion and mistake in the Japanese withdrawal operation as a whole. And again, this is the end of the Japanese campaign in Call of Duty World at War, if anyone was interested in knowing that fact. The 77th Division, which had scheduled their airstrikes and a heavy artillery bombardment of the castle heights for May the 29th, received little prior warning of the Marines' assault and was, quote, "barely able to avert its called-in strikes in time," without taking any credit away from Company A of the 5th Marines for the feat of capturing Shuri Castle. Its success was clearly the result of the combined efforts of the assault and support troops of the 10th Army, which had maintained relentless pressure on the enemy defenses and paved the way for a breakthrough. Now, capitalizing on this momentum, General Duval swiftly reorganized his forces to bypass the Iwano draw and consolidate these crucial gains. Meanwhile, Griebel's 3rd Battalion maneuvered down the divisional boundary, reaching a position just 2,000 yards from the village of Kokuba, prompting Weiling's 3rd Battalion to push their lines forward approximately 600 yards. In a coordinated effort, the 29th Marines executed a wheeling assault on May the 29th, with their 1st Battalion pivoting on the 3rd Battalion and attacking south and then east to bring the regimental line with the 22nd Marines. The ultimate objective of the 1st Battalion's attack was the high ground northwest of Shichina. The approach to the objective was over a low and open terrain, which drew the comment from the regiment as, quote, "about as suitable to fighting as a billiard table." Fire from strong points in the tombs and caves in the small hills and the ridges in the front kept the advance to a slow pace, and the assault companies A and C dug in slightly to the left rear of the positions of the 22nd Marines at nightfall. On another front, Robert's 1st Battalion successfully crossed the Kokuba River and advanced towards Telegraph Hill in the east of Naha. However, despite these efforts, intense fighting did erupt throughout the day without yielding any significant gains. Back at sea, the threat of kamikaze attacks returned with ferocity. Yet this time, American defenses held strong, resulting in only a single destroyer and 1 transport sustaining damage. As night fell, the Japanese began their long-anticipated withdrawal. General Amamiya's 24th Division commenced disengagement, moving southward while leaving a small force, including the 22nd Independent Battalion, to cover their retreat at Shuri. Meanwhile, General Suzuki's 44th Independent Mixed Brigade held their defensive lines outside Naha, and the 62nd Division maintained its positions near Chan and Kadadera. By dawn on the 30th, the bulk of the 32nd Army had successfully evacuated the Shuri lines, slipping away from the flanking maneuvers of Buckner's 10th Army. Thanks to continuous curtains of rain, General Ushijima executed a meticulously planned, properly deft withdrawal. His covering forces were strategically positioned to provide him with the necessary time to organize a defensive stance at the Kiamo Peninsula. However, the Americans, ever vigilant, were quick to capitalize on the enemy's disarray, maintaining relentless pressure on the faltering Japanese front. Over on the west coast, Robert's 2nd and 3rd Battalions crossed the canal, seamlessly moving through the 1st Battalion to take up the assault. They pushed forward tenaciously until they captured the entire area encompassing Telegraph Hill and Hill 27th. There, a network of Japanese machine gun positions, hidden in clusters of tombs on the low hills to the Marines' front, made progress slow and costly. Enemy machine gun emplaced in barrel tombs on Hill 27 in the east of Naha temporarily checked the infantry. Heavy sniper fire whipped the lines and killed Lieutenant Colonel Woodhouse of the 2nd Battalion 22nd Marines, who was forward controlling his battalion's attack. Major John Johnson, the executive officer, took command immediately and continued a steady pressure. During most of the day, tanks were unable to reach the position, but in the afternoon, 3 worked their way along the road north of the hill, and their direct fire enabled the Marines to seize it. The advance consisted of a series of local assaults and mop-up actions that brought the battalion to secure hill positions overlooking the Kokuba estuary and the railway line leading to the north by nightfall. Lieutenant Colonel Schisler's 3rd Battalion passed through the 1st Battalion of the 22nd Marines during the morning's attack and behind a screen of artillery, mortars, naval gunfire, and rockets drove onto the high ground at the eastern outskirts of Naha. By means of a series of holding attacks and flank assaults, Schindler was able to move his companies into the maze of enemy defenses where close-quarter grenades and small arms exchanges decided the issue. Once the dominating ground was won, the battalion was subjected to intense artillery and motor fire. At the same time, Weiling's 1st Battalion joined the offensive, encountering fierce resistance as they pressed through 600 yards of enemy territory. To the east, the Marines under Duval shifted their focus to vigorous patrolling as the supply situation gradually improved thanks to dedicated carrying parties and aerial airdrops. Despite these efforts, the 306th Regiment's assault on 110-meter hill encountered heavy opposition once again. However, Colonel Hamilton's 307th Regiment finally achieved a breakthrough, seizing the strategic Three Sisters. Dorothy Hill, a fortress directly east of Shuri, and a tower of strength in the enemy's inner line for the past 2 weeks, was attacked by the 3rd Battalion, 307th Infantry, 77th Division. The first platoon to reach the base of the hill was pinned down by heavy enemy fire. The platoon leader and all non-commissioned officers had been wounded. Other platoons maneuvered into position, and finally one squad reached the crest of the hill at the right end. This entering wedge enabled 2 companies to reach the top, from which they discovered 3 levels of caves on the reverse slope. They went to work methodically, moving from right to left along the top level, burning and blasting each cave and dugout with flamethrowers and satchel charges. When work on the top level was finished, the second level of caves and tunnels received a similar treatment, and then the third and lowest level. That night, 15 Japanese who had survived the day's fighting crawled out of the blasted caves, and they were killed by Americans from their foxholes. A great amount of enemy equipment, including 10 destroyed 150mm guns, and 25 trucks were found on the south reverse slope of Dorothy Hill, testifying to the enemy firepower at the strongpoint. On the 30th, the 77th Division took Jane Hill on its left flank and then almost unopposed took Tom Hill, the highest point of ground in the Shuri area, by about 5 p.m. This critical victory paved the way for Colonel Smith's forces to advance into the northern outskirts of the Shuri through Ishimi. In a remarkable display of coordination, Colonel Dill's 382nd Regiment finally secured the strategic Hand Hill and Obey Hill areas, while also capturing Hector Hill on their left flank. For over 9 days, elements of the 96th Division had been stalemated at the base of Hand Hill, just northeast of Shuri. On the 30th, Company F and 1 platoon of Company G of the 382nd Infantry resumed their attack on Hand Hill. Private First Class Clarence B. Kraft, a rifleman from Company G, was sent out ahead with 5 companies to test the Japanese positions. As he and his small group started up the slope, they were brought under heavy fire from Japanese just over the crest, and a shower of grenades fell upon them. 3 of the men were wounded, and the other 2 were stopped. Kraft, along a new replacement in his first action, kept on going, tossing grenades up the crest. From just below the crest, he threw 2 cases of grenades that were passed up front to him from the bottom. Those of the enemy going over his head or exploding near him. He then leapt to the crest and fired at point-blank range into the Japanese in a trench a few feet below him. Spurred by Kraft's example, other men now came to his aid. Reloading, Kraft pursued the Japanese down the trench, where they wiped out a machine gun nest and satchel charged the cave into which the remaining Japanese had retreated. Altogether, in the taking of Hen Hill, and as a result of Kraft's actions, about 70 Japanese were killed, at least 25 of whom were credited to Kraft himself. This daring action won him the Congressional Medal of Honor. To the left, Company F at the same time engaged in a grenade battle for Hector Hill, using 10 cases of grenades in the assault upon the crest. It was finally won after a satchel charge was hurled over the top and lit in the enemy's trench on the other side. Parts of Japanese bodies and pieces of the enemy equipment hurtled into the sky from the blast. Hen and Hector Hills had fallen by about 2 p.m. Southeast of their position, Colonel May's 2nd Battalion, 383rd Infantry, reached Love Hill and dug in, although scattered fire was still received from a machine gun in the nook of Charlie Hill, and there were a few live Japanese on Love itself. In the afternoon, the 3rd Battalion of the 383rd Infantry left their foxholes on Obe, where they had experienced a great ordeal, and proceeded down the reverse slope of the hill, finding only a few scattered Japanese. That night, the 383rd Infantry expressed a heartfelt sentiment when they reported, "Infinite relief to have Conical Hill behind us." Although there had been suicidal stands in a few places by the last of the holding force, the advances had been rapid. Simultaneously, Colonel Halloran's 381st Regiment effectively reduced the Conical Hill cutaway area and seized Roger Hill, with both regiments then advancing towards the vital Naha-Yanabara Road. At the same time, the 32nd Regiment launched a coordinated offensive that allowed them to successfully capture Oak, Ella, and June Hills. This advance brought Finn's troops directly into confrontation with Mabel and Hetty Hills, facing the formidable defenses of Chan. Meanwhile, strong patrols from the 184th Regiment ventured into Kiamo Peninsula strongholds, encountering only light enemy resistance, a turn of events that buoyed the American morale. As night fell, the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade and the 24th Division began their long-anticipated evacuation from Shuri. They pulled back behind the second line of blocking positions north of Tsukasan, executing their withdrawal amidst progressively decreased barrages of artillery mortar fire. Consequently, when Buckner's assault troops launched their offensive against the Shuri positions on the morning of May the 31st, they were met with an eerie silence, the stillness only interrupted by sporadic sniper fire and the distant crack of machine guns. The 77th Division swiftly took a 110-meter hill and advanced into Shuri with little to no resistance. Concurrently, Mason's units surrounding Shuri Castle moved north unopposed, aiding in the occupation of the battered ruins and troublesome Wanadraw. Shuri, the second town of Okinawa, lay in utter ruins. There was no other city, town, or village in the Ryukyus that had been destroyed so completely. Naha, too, had been laid to waste. Certain villages which had been strong points in the enemy defenses, such as Kakazu, Takeshi, Kochi, Arakachi, and Kunishi, had been fought over and leveled to the ground. But none of these compared with the ancient capital of the Ryukyus. It was estimated that about 200,000 rounds of artillery and naval gunfire had struck Shuri. Numerous airstrikes had dropped 1,000-pound bombs all over it. Mortar shells fell by the thousands as they arched their way into the town area. Only two structures, both made of concrete, the big normal school at the southwestern corner and the little Methodist church built in 1937 in the center of Shuri, had enough of their walls standing to form silhouettes of the skyline. All the rest was flattened rubble. The narrow paved and dirt streets, churned by high explosives and pitted with shell craters, were impassable to any vehicle. The stone walls of numerous little terraces were battered down. The rubble and broken red tile of the houses lay in heaps. The frame portion of the buildings had been reduced to kindling wood. Tattered bits of Japanese military clothing, gas masks, and tropical helmets, the most frequently seen items, and the dark-colored Okinawan civilian dress lay about in a wild confusion. Over all this crater-of-the-moon landscape hung the unforgettable stench of rotting human flesh. To the west, Griebel's 1st Battalion built upon Mason's gains, but it was the 3rd Battalion that led the main effort, successfully pushing to the hills just north of Shinchina. Meanwhile, General Bradley's advancing battalions moved rapidly towards their assigned objectives, spending much of the day mopping up isolated enemy holdouts. This relentless advance effectively pinched off the 77th Division, further consolidating American control in the region. On the extreme left flank, Halloran's 1st Battalion faced enemy forces defending the Tsukasan line, marking the only area where the 96th Division failed to reach the corps boundary. However, the Shuri area had been completely secured, and contact was made with Deval's Marines in the center. On the flanks, though, Buckner's units continued to encounter fierce resistance from tenacious Japanese defenders. The 32nd Regiment battled bravely through a series of heavily fortified strongpoints held stubbornly by Fujioka's troops. They managed to seize Duck Hill, consolidate their positions on Turkey Hill, and they captured the forward face of Mabel. Ultimately, they halted their advance just short of Chan. Meanwhile, on the west coast, Shepard's Marines pushed forward with support from tanks and artillery, targeting the strategic high ground west of Shichina and Kokuba. However, their advance was stalled by intense enemy fire emanating from Hill 46. During the night, the battered 44th Independent Mixed Brigade executed a withdrawal southeast towards the Kiamo Peninsula, covered by the 62nd Division, which quickly established a new defensive line along the Kokuba River and around Tsukasan. With the fall of Shuri and the withdrawal of the Japanese forces, Buckner's troops had emerged victorious in one of the most difficult and bloody battles of the entire Pacific War. By the end of May, reports indicated that approximately 62,548 Japanese soldiers had been confirmed killed, with another estimated 9,529 thought to have perished as well, 64,000 of whom were believed to have fallen in the fierce fighting within the Shuri fortified zone. While these casualty figures may be somewhat exaggerated, there is little doubt that the Japanese forces, especially their infantry combat units, had suffered severe depletion. In straight contrast, General Geiger's 3rd Amphibious Corps recorded significant losses of their own, with about 1,718 killed, 8,852 wounded, and 101 missing during the fighting around Shuri. Additionally, the losses for General Hodge's 24th Corps over the 2 months of combat totaled an alarming 26,044 casualties. On June the 1st, the American forces faced surprisingly little opposition from the enemy. A frustrated General Buckner, who had hoped to trap the defenders at Shuri, ordered his troops to advance rapidly in pursuit of the retreating Japanese units. With the 77th Division methodically mopping up remnants in the Shuri zone, General Hodge made a strategic decision. He shifted the 7th Division towards the east and ordered the 96th Division to move south to relieve the 32nd Regiment, taking up the western end of the Corps line. This strategic relief enabled Arnold to immediately push south with both the 17th and 184th Regiments in assault, managing to advance approximately 1,100 yards towards Okota and Batan, despite increasing stiff resistance from smaller enemy units. To the northwest, a coordinated attack on the Marine Division successfully secured all high ground overlooking the primary east-west road to Kokuba Valley. The 5th Marines anchored their position on the hills east of Shinchina, while Shepard's regiment seized the dominating heights north of Kokuba. Recognizing the strategic importance of the Oroku Peninsula, General Geiger planned a shore-to-shore landing there. To gather some intelligence, Shepard dispatched his reconnaissance company to conduct an amphibious reconnaissance of the peninsula that very evening. Their findings confirmed that the peninsula was not fortified with significant enemy strength. The following day, Colonel Snedeker's 7th Marines advanced to relieve the 6th Marine Division on the west coast. The 2nd Battalion continued their momentum by crossing the Kokuba River, moving into the hills on the south bank. Meanwhile, over to the east, the 5th Marines also crossed the upper branch of the river and pressed forward to secure the ridgeline that controlled the approaches to Tsukesan. This maneuver effectively placed the entire Naha-Yonabara Road firmly in American hands, further tightening their grip on the battlefield. That evening, Shepard dispatched his reconnaissance company to conduct an amphibious reconnaissance of the Oroku Peninsula. Their mission revealed that the peninsula was not heavily defended, opening up opportunities for American forces. Further east, the 383rd Regiment successfully cleared out Chan and seized some high ground just north of Tera and Kamisato. Meanwhile, the 381st Regiment conducted repeated assaults on hill positions that impeded their advance, ultimately managing to penetrate Karadera. The 7th Division maintained relentless pressure on the retreating garrison on the Chinen Peninsula, advancing its lines by about 2,400 yards towards Itokazu and Karabaru. But now it's time to shift our focus away from Okinawa and examine the latest operations of General LeMay's 21st Bomber Command. Since the invasion of Okinawa, Admiral Nimitz had requested that the B-29 Superfortress heavy bombers assist his naval forces in countering the deadly kamikaze attacks. In response to this, LeMay dispatched 53 bombers to target airfields at Kanoya on April the 8th, although the city of Kagoshima ended up being bombed instead. On April the 17th, 134 B-29s were sent against Kyushu, successfully neutralizing enemy airfield operations for over 18 hours. However, as we've seen, the Japanese continued to launch both scattered and mass kamikaze attacks. To address this ongoing threat, the 21st Bomber Command, bolstered by the arrival of Brigadier General Roger Amey's 58th Bombardment Wing, dedicated 75% of its combat effort to provide direct tactical support for the Okinawa campaign up to May the 11th. During this period of time, they flew a total of 2,104 sorties against 17 airfields in Kyushu and Shikoku. Although they did not fully neutralize these targets, significant damage was inflicted on the enemy storage, maintenance, and repair facilities. The bombers also served to keep the Japanese off balance, significantly disrupting their ability to plan and execute large coordinated attacks. In total, 24 B-29s were destroyed and 233 damaged during these operations, while 134 enemy interceptors were shot down. Between the strikes on Kyushu, General LeMay managed to fit in several medium-strength precision strikes against the Japanese aircraft industries, along with 2 large-scale night incendiary missions in Tokyo Bay. The first of these missions took place on April the 13th when 327 B-29s dropped an impressive 2,139 tons of ordnance upon the Arsenal district of Tokyo, located northwest of the Imperial Palace. The resulting fires consumed 11.4 square miles of this crucial industrial zone, destroying arsenal plants responsible for manufacturing and storing small arms, machine guns, artillery, bombs, gunpowder, and fire control mechanisms. Then, just 2 nights later on April the 15th, 303 bombers executed another incendiary attack, dropping nearly 2,000 tons of explosives with equal success. This raid devastated 6 square miles in Tokyo, 3.6 square miles in Kawasaki, and 1.5 square miles in Yokohama, which suffered collateral damage from the fire spills. Cumulatively, these 2 raids resulted in the destruction of 217,130 buildings in Tokyo and Yokohama, and 31,603 in Kawasaki. On April the 24th, 131 B-29s conducted a highly successful precision strike against the Tachikawa plant of Hitachi Aircraft Corporation. Although the next planned attack was thwarted by bad weather, 148 B-29s struck Kure on May the 5th, delivering devastating damage. After being relieved from support for the Okinawa operation on May the 11th, LeMay initiated a month of heavy fire raids to complete the campaign that had begun in March, while also addressing top priority precision targets as opportunities would arise. Accordingly, on May the 14th, 529 B-29s were dispatched to strike northern Nagoya, with 472 successfully dropping 2,515 tons of munitions, resulting in the burning of 3.15 square miles and inflicting significant damage on the Mitsubishi No. 10 engine works. Just 2 days later, 522 bombers returned to Nagoya, with 457 of them effectively delivering 3,609 tons over the dock and industrial areas in the southern part of the city, burning 3.82 square miles and causing extensive damage to the Mitsubishi No. 5 airworks. These two incendiary attacks finished Nagoya as an objective for area attacks. Good targets still remained in the city, and the command was to return 6 more times for precision attacks before Victory Day. However, the industrial fabric of the city had been ruined in the early precision attacks and in the fire raids that had burned out about 12 square miles of the total buildup in the urban area at about 40 square miles. In all, 113,460 buildings have been destroyed, 3,866 people have been killed, and 472,701 were rendered homeless. The displacement of workers aggravated the difficulties caused by the physical damage and had an important effect on civilian morale. After a week of respite temporarily interrupted by 318 plane precision attacks on the Tachikawa Aircraft Company, 562 B-29s were dispatched to strike Tokyo once more on May the 23rd. Out of these, 520 bombers reached their target, dropping an impressive 3,646 tons of explosives over the district stretching southward from the Imperial Palace along the west side of Tokyo Harbor. Despite encountering strong opposition, this attack resulted in the destruction of 5.3 square miles of the area. 2 nights later, 502 B-29s returned to Tokyo, targeting the area just north of their previous hit. They faced heavy resistance again, dropping 3,262 tons of incendiaries on the city, which resulted in the destruction of 16.8 square miles, marking the largest area devastated in a single Tokyo raid. In light of the heavy casualties suffered during these 2 strikes, General LeMay decided to assign P-51s from Iwo Jima to escort the future attacks. As a result, on May the 29th, 517 B-29s were escorted by over 105 P-51 fighters during an assault on Yokohama. These bombers successfully dropped 2,570 tons of munitions, burning out 6.9 square miles while the escorting fighters engaged in fierce battles against 150 aggressive interceptors. Meanwhile, General Whitehead's 5th Air Force was conducting an extensive program of area bombing against Formosa, experimenting with various types of bombs and tactics in preparation for future attacks on the Japanese mainland. Tohoku, the capital and political financial center of Taiwan, was subjected to constant aerial bombardment. The largest strike against modern-day Taipei, known as the Tohoku Air Raid, occurred on May the 31st, when units of the 5th Air Force, consisting of 117 consolidated B-24 Liberator heavy bombers, were sent to conduct the largest air raid ever on Taiwan. The bombing began from around 10 o'clock in the morning and lasted until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, during which the attack was nonstop. The Americans met virtually no resistance from the Japanese, mainly due to the attrition the Japanese air forces had suffered in the aerial battle of Taiwan-Okinawa, which completely exhausted Japan's fighter units in Taiwan. They successfully dropped approximately 3,800 bombs, targeting military units and government facilities. The office of the Governor General of Taiwan suffered a direct hit, in spite of the building being heavily camouflaged to avoid being targeted. The building suffered extensive damage from fires caused by the bombs and almost collapsed on itself. It was soon rendered unoccupable and was not repaired until the nationalist Chinese takeover. Other facilities hit during the bombing include the residence of the Assistant Governor General, the Taiwan Railway Hotel, the office of the Governor General Library, Army Headquarters, Tohoku Imperial University, Tohoku Station, Bank of Taiwan, Tohoku High Court, Tohoku New Park, and many other facilities. Many civilian installations were also damaged, including the Tohoku Prefectural Tohoku First Girls High School, Hwasun Catholic Church of Tohoku, and the famous Longshan Temple of Manka, which was hit in the main building and the left corridor. Many precious artifacts and artworks in the temple were lost during the ensuing fire. As a result of the extensive bombing campaigns, more than 3,000 civilians would lose their lives. Tens of thousands were displaced or left homeless. Countless buildings were destroyed, either directly by the attacks or by the fires they ignited. This devastation left a profound impact on the local population and infrastructure, marking yet another tragic chapter in the toll of the war. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Eastern Front Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, both written and narrated by me. And after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. And hey, if you want to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account found at www.patreon.com/PacificWarChannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights to the subjects I will tackle next. In the midst of the brutal Battle of Okinawa, American Marines faced relentless resistance as they pushed towards Shuri. Despite heavy casualties and daunting conditions, the tide turned when General Buckner ordered aggressive assaults that outmaneuvered the encircled Japanese forces. After days of relentless combat, they captured the stronghold, leading to the collapse of the Japanese defenses. As the dust settled, Shuri lay in ruins, marking a pivotal moment in the Pacific War, and showcasing the indomitable spirit of both the Americans and the Japanese soldiers.